Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, I am Justin Daniels. I am a shareholder and corporate M&A and tech transaction lawyer at the law firm Baker Donaldson, advising companies in the deployment and scaling of technology. Since data is critical to every transaction, I help clients make informed business decisions while managing data privacy and cybersecurity risk. And when needed, I lead the legal cyber data breach response brigade.
And this episode is brought to you by...
Dude.
Don't not give me the case of the giggles. And any of you new listening, you know we record these live. All right. We, Red Clover Advisors, help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Our dog Basil has a lot to say today, and I have been told that he doesn't actually show up on our podcasts, but I never know. So if you hear Basil in the background, he has a lot to say.
You once again scrolled while I was reading.
You're supposed to know what we say.
I think you're doing that just to try to confuse me.
I think the summertime of recording in the afternoon is very interesting because in the school year, we're sitting in carpool now. This is not a recording time. Okay.
We're going to have an interesting guest today.
All our guests are interesting.
This is a topic we don't cover as much.
Oh, that might be true.
Yes. So today we have John Graves, who is Senior Counsel at Nisos Holdings. He is an innovative legal leader. He has a diverse legal background at the intersection of law, highly regulated industry, and technology. He has over 2 decades of legal experience advising businesses, business leaders, global privacy teams, CISOs, and security teams, product groups, and compliance functions. He's also a graduate of the University of Oklahoma. Hello, John. How are you today?
Hey, guys. How are you doing? Thanks for having me. Real privilege to be here. If I'd known that Basil was going to participate, I would have brought Shadow and Pumpkin. We could have had a...
It could be a doggy convention.
There you go.
It could be. Well, John, we always like to start every episode and understand a little bit more about your background and career.
Sure. So I started out of law school. I had externed for a federal judge. Wasn't sure what I was going to do, but got some great exposure to federal practice. Really loved the litigation part of that. Wanted to do courtroom work. So I worked for small law firms, very litigation heavy, mostly on the plaintiff side, transitioned over to the defense side in my second firm, and then went out on my own and started my own firm. Did that for about 10 years, doing all kinds of business advice, was outside general counsel for some people, represented a lot of families, churches, nonprofits, and moved in-house about 7 years ago. That was my first privacy-heavy role. We had millions of PANs in our system, and so keeping those secure when we're sending them around, trying to settle and negotiate consumer debt at scale was my first introduction to privacy, which was an exciting one. And then went in-house at Paycom Software in Oklahoma City. Started out in HR and labor, and then ended up running their privacy group at this enterprise level. Was a registered data privacy officer in some jurisdictions, and was in charge of their product counsel teams. And then in June of this year, landed at Nisos, and it has been a great experience helping them as they transition from a service offering to a software as service offering, in addition to their experience and depth offering analyst-based services.
Ooh, that is interesting. I'm excited to hear more about the service and the software, but really, what a nice eclectic career of having, owned your own business, government, in-house, and now in the service and software side.
It's been exciting, never dull.
That is fair. Never dull.
Mm-hmm. So at Nisos, you've got a unique vantage point on threat actor behavior. And so how are you seeing AI change the way that threat actors operate, and how are defenders starting to use AI to try to keep up or stay ahead?
Yeah, I think the obvious is that the use of the AI just allows those threat actors to be more agile and nimble and do things at scale that they weren't able to do before. And so the synthetic identities that would never have been possible before, those types of things that can be really tricky for businesses to suss out, even if they're pretty sophisticated operators. And then you have state actors that are getting involved as remote schemes are more common. AI allows them to kind of expand that threat surface. And so I think we're seeing some, for us, it's interesting. For businesses, it's a pretty high risk. There's been a lot of FBI press releases lately about the culmination of some of their investigations into laptop farming. And those are state actors. And so DPRK and PRC, state actors that are gaining access to private infrastructures in the United States for all kinds of purposes, whether it's just revenue generation and they're just really good IT workers, or they're actually misappropriating that IP, or as we've seen in some of the crypto instances, just theft once they get the inside credentials. And so AI is allowing a lot of that to happen. It allows some of those platforms allow them to have really effective impersonation of either real people or an amalgamation of identities to form these synthetic identities. And so it allows people to be more effective at scale, be more agile. And so on the defender side, Nisos is a human risk management team. And so originally they started out as analyst based. That's still a really deep expertise of theirs, of using OSINT technologies to do attribution and sourcing, and to do identity verification. And taking that methodology and tradecraft and then building out a back-end software piece to allow that to be done at scale is AI-based in some instances. And so AI is allowing defenders to take some of that data collection at scale to do the large-scale kind of larger grain sifting at scale, and allows the defenders to meet that agility of the threat actors with agility of their own. And so those threat dashboards using that tradecraft and analyst backend can be a really powerful tool to combat these threat actors that are using AI to their advantage.
John, can we talk a little bit more about some example use cases of what that might be? Because I can imagine we have some people listening and think, well, that's really interesting, but I need more. I need to understand how do they actually sift through data? What kind of data are they sifting through to help identify who's on the scene and what they can do?
Yeah, and so AI, as you can imagine, there's lots of tools that can allow the collection of data at scale. So that collection of data is step one. So how do we find the data that may be relevant? What is that? Some of that's tradecraft, some of it's just common sense. The second step to that is, how do we separate the signal from the noise, right? And so if there's tracking user IDs or use email addresses across the web to see what they're associated with, either businesses or whether they're usernames, and then tracking those usernames back to either a history of nefarious action or misidentification, so they don't have any correlation to the person that they're supposed to. That is very, very laborious if it's a manual human action process. And so being able to use AI and using the LLMs and the training that you have there to sift that, but then also using the data visualization tools to make those connections can be really strong and be really helpful. And so, and even Justin, in the M&A side of things, when you are seeing the connections between companies that you might not have otherwise been disclosed, or there might have risk associated with them based on prior history, either across IP addresses, usernames. Are they who they say they are? Are they doing what they say they're doing currently? Being able to sift that at scale is where those AI tools come in handy. Because having a person go through all that information would be time consuming and expensive.
Thank you for sharing. That doesn't sound like much fun to do on a manual basis at all. Why are you looking at me? That doesn't sound fun.
So, kind of a little bit about how, as organizations adopt AI tools, how should they be thinking about adversarial threats like prompt injection? They could poison the data, misuse of generative AI for social engineering, because everyone seems hell bent to start using AI, but they really haven't been thinking about the cyber risks that are really nascent other than deepfakes, which we all talked about in our pre-show.
Yeah, I think the first step is for whoever's making those decisions to recognize the risk. And I think there has been a lot of pressure on all kinds of business verticals, business people, CISOs, data science to implement AI because they're expected to implement the AI. And I think implement the AI means so many different things across those business verticals that I think the first step is to recognize that each one of those presents interesting risks. And those risks are not even necessarily known. And so I think it's not only important to recognize the risk, but then to have someone who understands the risk help the business assess it. And those are different skill sets, right? And not every in-house team has those. Not every even law firm has those. And so it's really important to get the technical folks and the legal folks aware of the risk and able to assess that risk. Because you were talking with Ann Bradley about some of these risks that are 10 years down the road. But let's talk about the risks we have right now. And I think sometimes it's easier to say, well, this is the worst thing that could happen. It's remote. It's not, qualitatively important, and discount the fact that, we may have some, even if it's low probability, qualitatively really high risk situations happening here if we're implementing this AI without proper governance. Governance on the inputs, governance on the processing, and then governance on the outputs. And I think understanding that and being able to convey that to lay leaders in a meaningful way is really important. And so I think just the recognition of that risk and understanding all the things that can happen is important.
John, when should companies think about bringing you in or performing this type of analysis?
Yeah, so for Nisos specifically, anytime there's a question of human risk, and that can take the form of I have dollars in jeopardy, and so I want to make sure the people that I'm dealing with, reputationally are sound and that they're doing the things that they say they're doing, and they're not doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. That is an important time to bring us in. Also, if there is an actual identified risk and there's attribution requirements, and so we see that there may be a risk out there behind a username. We want to see, what's going on with that. What is it? A real person? Is it a real threat actor? That kind of work Nisos is really adept at. And then as we scale our platform services, being able to provide those services at scale to enterprises is going to be really important. An easy example is that's been in the news a lot is for executives. There's never been a time in the history of the United States where there was more information available about political figures, executives, law enforcement officials. And so that information is public. And that the fact that that information is public in and of itself is not necessarily new. But the ability to get that information and action it is a frightening reality for a lot of CEOs and executives. And so the fact that they have a Strava account, that they, run the same route through the same park every Thursday may not seem a big deal to those executives, but the fact that that Strava account's public and that, a threat actor would know that route being able to analyze the open source information that's available to threat actors. On the one hand, you can reduce that profile and so prevent threat actors from having access to that information if you can identify it early enough and get it off of the public domain. And then two, you can use that information to assess potential threats and see whether they are real or whether they're not, and how to deploy resources against those. And whether or not it's a situation to involve law enforcement in, or whether it's a security team or some kind of in-house assets can be deployed against that threat to mitigate it.
That was really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing. I imagine there's a number of different people listening who need to be able to understand some of those scenarios to think about when this type of analysis would be valuable.
Yeah, it's really important when when people are thinking about real world threats, to think about what information is available in those digital platforms.
Like, for example, Jody, if you're a large publicly traded company and you get ransomware, unfortunately, tactic that the threat actors will use is to leverage their knowledge of where maybe your kids' activities are on social media and demonstrate their knowledge of it as a way to leverage you to paying or doing things that they want. So part of what has to happen nowadays is, to John's point, educating people who are at risk about not only what kind of information they put there publicly, but maybe close loved ones who could be leveraged given that person's role.
That's right. And I think we've seen too that, CLOP had its, was a record-setting month in May of 25. They had like 325 documented ransomware attacks. And now we've got an unstable environment. And Justin, you've probably experienced that as well. It used to be there were the good guys that were the ransomware guys. And so we knew who we were dealing with. And so you knew that if you paid the ransom, then they would be able to unencrypt and they would give you your information back. And now we've got, Ransom Hub and Dragon Force competing to see who can double extort people the most. And so I think that that instability in the ransomware game
system
business is causing some real consternation for people who are used to the last 5 years where it was a pretty stable environment. And so I think that's a frightening reality as well. Again, a lot of that is AI based as well, right? Because you've got these ransomware SaaS services, and they, instead of these kit kids that are pretty easy to identify, you've got real sophisticated tools in the hands of some maybe less sophisticated actors. And so that definitely elevates the risk, because once you pay the ransom, whether or not it's going to de-encrypt or that's the end of the incident, it's hard to tell anymore.
So what is advice that you might have for maybe business leaders who are skeptical or just not carefully considering the potential for unintended consequences or novel attack vectors due to this accelerated AI adoption?
I think tabletops are really important. And so we've often thought of tabletops in terms of cyber attacks and what do we do and every time Justin says the ransomware cyber attack brigade, I have this image of my mind of him and a team riding into to save the day, which is probably not too far off base. I love that mental image. So before the trumpet sounds and the brigade comes charging in, thinking upstream of that, what can we tabletop with technical people that can lay out real risk, potential risk, probability, qualitative pieces of that? How can we think through that and kind of do some mental red teaming of our own systems to really think through what the risks are and whether we have an appetite for them? I think one of the things that we have matured in public companies especially is this idea of cyber risk. And so on audit committees, we regularly see cyber risk updates to the audit committees. They're prepared to make qualitative decisions regarding breaches under the new SEC rules. And so they're not equipped with the same level of sophistication regarding AI. And I would say not only at the board level, but even at the business leader level, I don't think they've been equipped to understand those risks. And so I think if I were a business leader, I would want to understand what those risks are. And I think one of the best ways to understand that is to sit down and say, okay, this is where we are obtaining the data. Is it internal? Is it external? What kind of firewalls do we have internally? What kind of data hygiene practices do we have to prevent pulling the wrong information, to deprecate information that we don't want being pulled into these models? And then also understanding the AI architecture. And so how is it in on-prem processing? Is it on device processing? Is it in the cloud? And tabletopping those can identify points of risk for the technical folks to go dive into that risk and bring it back to the business leaders and help them understand that. But I think absent that kind of exercise, it's really difficult because these are really complex systems. And there's so many layers to it that it's very difficult for a lay business leader who's a very busy person and really focused on quarterly financial metrics to really take the time to understand and dig into that risk. And so I think one of the ways that you can be really effective and get to the meat of the problems the fastest is to sit down with whoever's responsible for the AI piece at the leadership and IC levels and walk through how those AI systems are operating in a tabletop way and say, okay, if X happens, what would we do? If Y happens, what would we do? And I think that's a really effective way and a good use of time for business leaders.
John, I'm curious, people do all different length tabletops. Is there a recommended range of time that you think people should be doing these? And then who might you suggest should participate?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question to answer, depending on what the implementation of the AI system is. And so, I've had tabletops with, data science leaders that were walking into their office and saying, "Hey, I know we've got half an hour for this. Let's talk about this instead." If this, to talk about injection attacks, is there the potential for an injection attack here? Is that possible? What are you doing to mitigate that? And seeing how they answer that kind of on the fly is interesting, as opposed to have these published scenarios. We take a week to prepare and then sit down at the table talk. And so I think it's appropriate kind of at all levels, depending on who you are and how you're functioning with your enterprise. I'll call them, AI governance folks, but they could be data scientists, they could be IT security people. But I think if it's a real system that has real risk to it, I think it's worth taking, half a day to sit down and talk through all those risks. And I think the less time, the earlier is better. And so if you can spend an hour or two when you're in the ideation stage, rather than spending half a day or a day when you're getting ready to implement and roll out, is better. And that gives the product people, the data science, the IT governance folks, the electronic data governance people, get everybody together and say, okay, this could happen. What would we do here? How would we prevent this from happening? And then you can get the right mix of interdisciplinary folks to weigh in. So they could be the business leaders. They could be the product folks. They could be the data governance people, obviously, the data science people that are in charge of the data infrastructure. And then you've got your engineering teams that are at the application layer. All of those people that have those deep skill sets can bring a lot to the table, even if it's just tangential to the AI piece of it.
Helpful. Thank you so much for sharing. I know people are always curious. How long should it be? When should I do them? Good to know.
So, John, do you have a best cyber tip you might share with our audience based on your experience?
Yeah, so my best cyber tip is not a technical tip. Because of all of the things that we've already discussed about understanding risk, my best cyber tip is for people to practice explaining these principles to 10-year-olds and see if they can get them to understand that. Because I know that as a non-technical, non-data science person, when I was talking with some of those people, I had some frustrating conversations because I said, you're going to have to break that down for me because I just don't understand. And understanding is really important for identifying risk and understanding how the regulatory frameworks might apply. And so I think my cyber tip is these things are already complicated and we don't need to make them more so. And so if you're a security professional or a legal professional and you're talking to business leaders, really practice breaking it down and making it as simple as possible.
That works really well. We've tried this at home before, where one person on the podcast might be sharing really complicated things, and then one younger person might go, I don't understand. And then the other podcast person I don't know who that could be, then is explaining things in a more simple way. And it makes such a huge difference when we use really simple words.
I think that's always a good idea. And people are coming to us because we're professionals and we have the technical experience to make it happen and to help them make these decisions. But they don't necessarily have the same vocab and the same language skill set that we have. So I think it's important to not discount that.
I actually think that is accurate in any field. Everyone here has probably gone to some health professional and they've explained you have the fill in the blank complicated formal phrase and you go, what is that? Can you explain it to me? And what does this mean? You have a set of questions that are just get to the really important pieces that you can comprehend. And so I feel every industry and function has its own unique vernacular, and anyone not in that doesn't know all of it. And it's helpful to be able to explain it in really simple terms.
I think my podcast host was being passive aggressive is what I think.
I don't know. Maybe we should ask our kids. But instead, we're going to ask John when he is not talking all things threats and AI and security and privacy. What does he like to do for fun?
So I've got some really talented kids. And so most of my spare time is either as a volleyball spectator, a tennis spectator, or a musical theater spectator. I am got some really talented kiddos, and so most of my spare time is cheering them on. And when I'm not doing that, I'm usually outside doing something. And if I can sneak in a day of sailing somewhere, I love that.
Oh, that sounds so fun. We also have some volleyball and musical theater happening in our house. Wonderful. Well, John, if people would like to connect with you or learn more about Nisos, where can they go?
Sure. So our website at www.nisos.com. We are hiring for a variety of roles, so check out our careers page. And johng@nisos.com is my email address.
Amazing. Well, John, we're so excited that you came to join us here today and also to listen to our silly banter. So thank you for joining.
Well, it was absolutely a pleasure and a real privilege to be on your podcast. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.